What if your exhaustion had nothing to do with your body, but with what you've been carrying in silence? Have you ever really stopped to think about that? Because many times the body sleeps, rests for a few hours, wakes up, but inside something still feels heavy, as if you're never truly restored. Life goes on, responsibilities are there, everything looks normal on the surface, but there's a kind of weariness that doesn't show up on medical tests, doesn't improve with coffee, and doesn't disappear over the weekend. Maybe your emotional world is tired, even when, from the outside, everything seems fine. You work, you talk, you reply to messages, you do what needs to be done, you function. But are you actually living or just operating on autopilot? That difference runs deeper than it seems. Modern life keeps us constantly moving, constantly busy, constantly solving something. And paradoxically, inside, we become more and more still, disconnected from ourselves. We've learned to fill every silence. Any empty space turns into a screen, noise, distraction, and that's not by accident. Silence is uncomfortable when there's a lot piled up inside us. Interestingly, when you look at the life of Jesus, you see the opposite of what we do today. He withdrew. He stepped away from the crowds. He embraced silence, not because he was weak, but because he understood something we've forgotten. The inner life also needs rest. Meanwhile, we do the opposite. When we're tired inside, we speed up on the outside. We produce more, distract ourselves more, talk more, as if keeping everything in motion were a way not to hear what's asking for attention. And then this strange feeling appears. You're not exactly sad, not exactly unmotivated, but you're tired in a way that's hard to explain. Maybe you learned to be strong too early, to swallow what you feel, to not be a burden, to keep going even without understanding what's happening inside you. And that comes at a cost, not all at once, but gradually. The emotional world doesn't sound an alarm. It wears down quietly while you keep telling yourself this is just adult life, just responsibility, just another phase. This video isn't about cliches or quick motivation that lasts a few minutes. It's about awareness, about looking inward honestly and realizing that maybe your deepest exhaustion doesn't come from what you do, but from what you feel and never stop to listen to. There's a big difference between being tired and being emotionally depleted. And let me challenge you with something important before we go on. What if the problem isn't a lack of physical rest, but the fact that you were never taught how to rest emotionally? What if no one ever taught you how to slow down on the inside, only how to keep going on the outside? That answer might change more than you realize. Emotional burnout doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't explode overnight or send a clear warning that you've reached the limit. Most of the time, it just wears down little by little in silence while you keep living as if nothing is wrong. That's why so many people only realize it when they're already exhausted, not because they were weak, but because they endured more than they should have for too long. This wear begins in small, almost invisible ways. It starts when you swallow what you feel to avoid conflict. When you smile even though you're tired inside because you think it's not the right moment to talk about it. When you keep going out of obligation, even though something in you is asking for a pause. None of these things seem serious on their own. The problem is the accumulation. The emotional world stores everything that wasn't expressed, everything that wasn't fully felt. Maybe you learned that feeling too much is a problem, that showing tiredness is a sign of weakness. That complaining means being ungrateful, and so you keep pushing inward what should be handled with care. But let me tell you something important. The problem isn't feeling too much. The problem is not processing what you feel. Emotions that aren't heard don't disappear, they turn into weight. Have you noticed how the body keeps going, but motivation starts to fail? How simple tasks begin to require an enormous effort? That's not laziness. Often, it's an emotional self that's tired of holding up roles, the strong one, the responsible one, the one who endures everything in silence. Keeping those roles alive all the time consumes an immense amount of energy. There's also a growing distance from silence. Modern life has unlearned how to be quiet with itself because silence asks questions. Silence reveals what was ignored. And when you never stop, it's not because you don't have time, it's because you may not know what to do when the noise disappears. Emotional exhaustion often grows right there, in this constant escape from oneself. When you look at the teachings of Jesus, you notice something both profound and simple. He asked questions that went straight to the heart. What do you want me to do for you? That question seems obvious, but it's powerful. How often do you ask yourself that honestly? How often do you stop and listen without judgment, without rushing to fix things, without minimizing what you feel? Most of us learn to answer what's expected of us, not what we truly want or need. And living that way is exhausting. It pulls you away from your own emotional truth. You live on autopilot, meeting expectations, while something inside grows more distant. It's important to understand this without guilt. This isn't about blaming yourself or saying you did everything wrong. You did what you knew, what you were taught, what was possible at the time. Emotional exhaustion isn't a sign of failure. Often, it's a sign of prolonged resistance, of someone who stayed strong when they couldn't fall, but never had space to truly rest. Maybe you see yourself in this. Maybe some of these situations resonate right now, and if they do, know that you're not alone. Many people live exactly like this, keeping everything running on the outside while feeling increasingly tired on the inside. If this kind of reflection connects with how you feel, it makes sense that you're here. And if you want to keep exploring these themes more deeply, subscribing to the channel is a simple way not to miss content like this. And if at any moment you thought, "That's me," write in the comments, "I relate." Sometimes recognizing it is already the first step toward easing the weight. Emotional wear begins when there's no space for it to exist, when it isn't heard, when it's rushed, when it's always pushed aside. Understanding that doesn't fix everything immediately, but it changes how you see yourself. Because maybe your exhaustion isn't a problem to eliminate, but a signal to understand. There's a deeper point that almost no one notices when talking about emotional exhaustion. It's not just too many tasks or accumulated disappointments. The invisible root is often a constant internal state of alert, like even when everything seems calm. Something inside you never truly relaxes. You rest your body, but your mind stays on guard. Your emotional self stays alert, anticipating, predicting, trying to prevent future pain. This state has a name, even if few people use it in everyday life: emotional hypervigilance. It's when you live emotionally prepared for the worst, even when nothing is wrong. You wake up already thinking about what could go wrong. You live with the sense that you must always be alert, because if you let your guard down, something might fall apart. And that is deeply exhausting. You may not even realize you live this way, because it's become your normal. You've gotten used to anticipating problems, replaying conversations, imagining scenarios, thinking about what you should have said or done differently. The mind never fully shuts off. There's always some emotional loose end, a feeling that something is still missing, even when you do everything right. That creates a quiet exhaustion, not explosive, but constant. It's like driving with your foot lightly on the brake all the time. You move forward, but with double the effort. And often you call this responsibility, maturity, or care, but in reality it's an emotional self that doesn't feel safe enough to rest. When Jesus said, "Do not worry about tomorrow," he wasn't denying reality or telling people to ignore problems. He was pointing to something deeper. Anxiety doesn't come from a lack of faith, as many think. It comes from an excess of control, from fear of letting go, from the belief that if you're not constantly alert, everything will fall apart. In that sense, Anxiety is trying to carry tomorrow's weight today. It's living emotionally in the future while your body stays in the present. And that creates an internal split, a mind that never rests, and a heart that never feels fully at peace. You try to relax, but something inside stays restless, as if you always owe something to life. Maybe you recognize that feeling, the feeling of always being emotionally behind, always chasing something you can't quite name. Even in good moments, there's an undercurrent of tension, a difficulty fully enjoying them because your mind is already on the next problem, the next responsibility, the next challenge. This way of living doesn't come out of nowhere. Often, it grows from past experiences, times when you had to stay alert to avoid getting hurt again. The problem is, the situation ends, but your emotional self stays in survival mode. And living in survival for too long comes at a high cost. Here's something important to reflect on. The real problem isn't what you feel, not sadness, not fear, not anxiety itself. The real problem is how you learned to survive emotionally. The strategies that once protected you may now be the very things exhausting you. That realization changes everything, because then you start to see that maybe your exhaustion isn't weakness, but a system that was never given permission to rest. And in the next part, this awareness becomes a turning point, because you'll understand that the greatest weight isn't in the emotions themselves, but in the patterns you use to deal with them. When you start paying closer attention to emotional exhaustion, you realize it doesn't come only from external situations, but mainly from mental patterns that repeat every day, almost unnoticed. They seem normal, necessary, but they slowly drain your energy. And the most dangerous part is that many of these patterns are socially rewarded, which makes you rarely question whether they're costing you more than they should. One of these patterns is excessive self-criticism, that inner voice that's never satisfied. You do a lot, but always feel you could have done more. You achieve something, but quickly move on to pressuring yourself about the next step. There's no emotional pause, because rest comes with guilt, and living this way is deeply tiring because you never feel enough where you are. Another common pattern is the need to please, saying yes when you want to say no, constantly adjusting yourself to avoid disappointing anyone, carrying expectations that aren't always yours. This creates a constant state of emotional vigilance, because you're always tuned into what others think, feel, or expect, and that constant outward focus pulls you away from your own center. There's also the fear of making mistakes, not the healthy fear that brings care, but the paralyzing kind that makes you overthink everything, doubt yourself, and avoid simple decisions. Mistakes become a threat to your identity, not a part of being human. Holding that tension inside requires enormous energy. Constant comparison completes the cycle. You look at other people's lives, pace, and results, and measure your worth by them. Even when your life is moving forward, it never feels like enough. Comparison quietly creates a sense of always being behind, like you're chasing something you'll never reach. The subtle danger is that all of this looks normal. It's labeled responsibility, maturity, ambition, care, but inside it keeps you in constant resistance, resisting mistakes, frustration, imperfection, human limits, and resisting all the time is exhausting. When you observe the life of Jesus, you see a stark contrast. He never rushed to prove anything. He didn't live to meet external expectations. He didn't compare himself. He didn't over-explain. There was an inner clarity that brought lightness to his movement. And that lightness didn't come from an easy life, but from the absence of unnecessary inner struggle. Many people are tired not because they live too much, but because they resist too much, resist what they feel, who they are, what they can't control. Emotional exhaustion grows precisely in that constant attempt to keep everything under control. And maybe noticing this is the first step toward changing how you relate to yourself. There's a simple but deeply uncomfortable truth that almost no one notices when talking about emotional exhaustion. Most people believe they're tired because they're weak, too sensitive, or unable to handle life's pressure, but nothing could be further from the truth. Your emotional self isn't tired because you're weak. It's tired because you've been strong for too long. Strong when you had to swallow your tears. Strong when you had to keep going without wanting to. Strong when no one asked how you were really doing. Strong when you chose not to stop so you wouldn't disappoint, fall behind, or fail. That quiet strength, which almost no one sees, slowly takes its toll, not loudly, but steadily. You got used to holding everything inside, to being the support, the responsible one, the one who endures. And maybe you never allowed yourself to be emotionally cared for, never gave yourself permission to admit it was too heavy. That creates inner confusion, because outwardly you seem fine, but inwardly something is asking for rest. Seeing this changes how you view yourself. Exhaustion stops being a source of shame and becomes a sign of humanity, a sign of someone who endured, who stayed standing, who didn't quit, but now needs to learn something new, how to rest inside without abandoning life. And that's exactly what comes next. Because there is a way to begin resting emotionally without dropping responsibilities, without escaping reality, without losing who you are. There is a way to live with greater inner lightness, even amid challenges. Understanding this may be the beginning of a deep shift. When we talk about emotional rest through the lens of Jesus' teachings, one thing needs to be clear from the start. This isn't about escaping life, abandoning responsibilities, or disconnecting from the world. Jesus never taught escape. He taught presence, a kind of rest that happens on the inside, even while life continues on the outside. Many times, he withdrew into silence, not because he was tired of living, but because he knew silence organizes the inner world. Today, we do the opposite. When we're emotionally tired, we fill ourselves with noise, constant stimulation, information, distraction, and the emotional self finds no space to reorganize. Emotional rest begins when you allow small inner pauses, moments where you don't have to fix anything, explain anything, or prove anything. Just be. That takes courage, because slowing down inside makes you feel what you've postponed, but that's also where healing begins. Learning limits is another key part. Jesus didn't meet every expectation. He didn't rush to every call. He didn't constantly explain himself. He knew how far to go and when to stop. Limits aren't rejection, they're care. And many times, emotional exhaustion comes from living without clear boundaries, always available, always open, always giving beyond what you can sustain. Listening to yourself is central. That simple question Jesus asked others still applies to you. What do you want me to do for you? When was the last time you asked yourself that honestly, without answering with obligations, without thinking about what you should want, but about what you truly need right now? Faith, in this sense, is also learning to pause. Trust isn't only about moving forward, it's about knowing when to rest. It's accepting that you don't have to carry everything alone, that not everything depends on your control, that letting go a little isn't losing, it's breathing. Maybe this is a good moment to reflect on the rhythm you're living, not just the external one, but the internal one. The speed of your thoughts, your self-demands, your expectations. Because sometimes change isn't about doing less, but about demanding less of yourself inside. If you know someone who lives emotionally exhausted, strong on the outside and drained on the inside, sharing this video can be an act of care. And if this content has resonated with you, subscribing helps continue this conversation more deeply in future videos. Emotional rest is a path. It doesn't happen overnight, but it begins with awareness, small inner choices, and permission not to stay on high alert all the time. And that alone can change a lot. Maybe, after all this, you're starting to see something important. Your emotional self may not be broken, failing, or weak. Maybe it's just been ignored for too long, ignored in rushed decisions, automatic responses, and the constant need to keep going without asking if this way of living still makes sense. Many people spend their lives trying to fix what really just needs to be heard. The emotional self doesn't always ask for complex solutions. Often it asks for presence, attention, a space where you don't have to perform or justify what you feel. When that doesn't happen, exhaustion becomes a language. It's how your inner world says something needs to change. When you observe how Jesus dealt with tired people, you see a very different pattern. He never ignored them. He stopped. He listened. He welcomed them. He didn't rush the process, minimize the pain, or offer ready-made answers. There was deep respect for each person's inner timing, for the understanding that exhaustion is also a way the soul speaks. And maybe that's what's hardest today. We live in a world that speeds everything up, but doesn't respect emotional rhythm. That praises endurance, but doesn't teach inner rest. And you may have been shaped by that world, learning to be strong, productive, functional, but never learning how to listen inwardly. Now there's a question that doesn't need to be answered out loud, but deserves to be felt honestly. If Jesus were looking at you right now, what would he notice about your emotional state? What would be visible beyond your words, your obligations, and what you show the world? Maybe that question will echo after the video ends, and that's okay. Some questions aren't meant to be answered quickly. They're meant to open space, create awareness, and start an inner dialogue that can change a lot over time. If something in this video touched you deeply, write in the comments what resonated most. Your experience might help others who also feel tired but can't explain why. Liking and subscribing is a simple way to support this kind of content and continue this reflective journey in future videos. Maybe the rest you're looking for isn't about stopping everything, but about finally listening to yourself. And that could be the first step toward a lighter, more conscious, more human way of living.